As we look at this question, there's some trends that have happened in Multisite through the last few years, especially since I first started down this road in 2002, that could very much impact this question for you and for your church. And the first trend that I've seen is Multisite has moved from niche to mainstream. As I said, when I very first got involved in Multisite, it was a very niche way of doing church. It was mostly churches that were in the suburbs. It was mostly large, very fast-growing churches. Very few examples around the country. In fact, Leadership Network early on gathered all of the Multisite churches they could find. We were a part of that group, and there were only 12 churches in the group, and some of those churches were just barely even thinking about Multisite. It was very niche, not for everybody. Now, as we have seen it grow, most of the largest churches in America are Multisite. Many churches that are being planted today, the church planners are considering Multisite even before they hold their very, very first service. And so it's become much more of a mainstream thing. In fact, I would imagine that if you're not already part of a church with multiple sites, you can name one or two or three in your community that are meeting in more than one location. So now that it's no longer just a niche thing for a very few churches, but a mainstream thing for thousands of churches across the country, could it possibly work for you? You know, another trend that I've seen emerge over the last few years is the idea of Multisite has gone from necessity to opportunity. Early on, the churches that went Multisite for the most part did so because they couldn't think of anything else. Like I said, at Seacoast, the reason we opened our first offsite location is because we didn't have any more room in our auditorium. And the first location succeeded. We saw about 300 people leave our main auditorium and go to our new site, which enabled us to open up room for about 300 more people. And so as we began opening more and more sites, for the most part, we did it for that purpose. We didn't have room, and so we opened a new site. But here's what I see. More and more churches are exploring Multisite, not because they don't have any more room in their auditorium, but because they see an opportunity. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about some of those opportunities that might be great opportunities and some that might be more challenging. But the reality is Multisite is no longer just for churches out of room on Sunday mornings. Sometimes it's churches that are looking for a new opportunity. Another trend that I see that I'm excited about, an innovation in Multisite, is the move from city to rural. As I said, early on in the Multisite movement, the churches that I was aware of that were going Multisite, almost all of them were near large cities, and most of them were in the suburbs. In fact, for the first few years, almost every church that was successful in Multisite started out in a metropolitan area. But here's what I'm seeing, is I'm seeing churches in smaller communities look around at the other communities around them, and they see that nobody is planting churches in these small rural communities. Many of those communities have good churches that have been there for a long time, but the reality is the people that will go to the churches that are already in that small town are already going. There's always a population of people who either maybe they went to one of those churches when they were younger and now they no longer go, or they've never gone to church, and who's going to reach them? And I see rural churches saying, you know what we're doing in our town, the thing that God is blessing in our town, I wonder if it would work in the town 10 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles down the road. And so we're seeing more and more Multisite churches in smaller, very small communities. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's your environment. Maybe you're in a smaller community, and you can think of 3, 4, 5 towns in the vicinity that really don't have a church like your church that's reaching people from God and for God in the way that your church is. And maybe it's a possibility for you. This innovation from city to rural may open up the conversation in your environment. And then another trend, another innovation that I see in Multisite is the movement from mega to micro. Very early, as I said, most of the churches that went Multisite, or at least the ones that were well known in Multisite, were very large churches. When Seacoast Church, the church I worked with, opened our first offsite campus, we already had 3,000 people attending our church. When we met the guys at Life Church in Oklahoma City and they began opening other campuses, they already had 5, 6, 7,000 people attending their church. And it wasn't unusual. In fact, it was the norm that the multi-site churches were mega churches, defined as a church of 2,000 attenders on the weekend or more. But I see smaller and smaller churches becoming multi-site. And sometimes this could be a mistake. Maybe they're not large enough, and we'll talk about that. But oftentimes it's a really cool opportunity as we see churches of maybe 300 or 400 people launching another campus. And if that new campus grows to 100 or 150 people, that's a huge success. And so they can launch another campus. And then we're beginning to see even smaller campuses. One of the most exciting innovations going on right now is a real push to what's being called microsites. Sites that may only have 20 people attend or 25 or 30 people attend, and that would be a successful site. And microsites tend not to meet in large buildings. Very few microsites would have professional staff. They would be run by volunteers. They might meet in a large home, or they might meet in a clubhouse or in a coffee shop that's not open at that time of day. And so we're seeing that multi-site is becoming an option for more and more churches. No longer do you need to be a church of 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 to consider multi-site. You might be a church of 500. You might be a church of 300. I've seen churches as small as 200 move to multi-site in this micro-site idea. And another way that multi-site has become smaller and larger at the same time is a trend toward online campuses. You know, when I first got involved in online campuses, it was pretty complicated to do. You had to have some knowledge of HTML. You had to understand how to stream files, and it really took a lot of time and a lot of effort and quite a bit of money. But today, any church with a camera and an internet connection can stream their services live on Facebook or other platforms. And so we see many, many churches going multi-site by being one physical location and then a virtual location online. So over the years, there's become a lot of options for churches who are considering multi-site.